This evening, we are going to speak about Abram's faith. Abram's faith is very special because he was Paul or Shaul's hero of faith. Romans 4, verses 1 to 5. Then what should we say? Abram, our forefather, obtained by his own efforts. For if Abram came to be considered righteous by Elohim because of legalistic observances, then he has something to boast about. But this is now not how it is before Elohim. So, for what does the Tanakh say? Avram put his trust in Elohim, and it was credited to his account as righteousness. Now the account of someone who is working is credited not on the ground of grace, but on the ground of what is owed him. However, in the case of one who is not working, but rather is trusting in him who makes ungodly people righteous, his trust is credited to him as righteousness. So Abram had no reason to boast. His works did not make him righteous. However, he really was righteous, which means that his works were righteous, but did not make him righteous. And this is a big difference, because Abram's faith was reckoned to him as righteousness. And his faith created righteousness in him. And therefore, it's important to explore Abram's faith, because Abram's faith was credited to him as righteousness. Elohim justifies the ungodly. He creates righteousness in people by faith. Abram's faith consisted of listening to Elohim's voice, obeying it, and Elohim created righteousness in him by his faith. Then Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. And he passed in front of Moshe, proclaiming, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, El, compassionate and gracious Elohim, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. The question then is, what is righteousness? And we need to define this accurately to understand what Abram was about. Righteousness is actually expressed as the attributes of God. And when God passes before Moses, he mentions all these attributes. And this means that a righteous person is someone who can show these attributes of God to people so that they will glory in God for those attributes and not glory in the person who is busy demonstrating. So the first two attributes are Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. So this is the name of the Most High twice. And the reason it is here twice is because Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is the name that is associated with him as judge. And he judges twice. He judges once at the beginning at creation. And this is at the Feast of Yom Teruah. Because Yom Teruah is the remembrance of the creation of man, where he judged without compassion on sin, and he brought death as a result of sin. The second, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, is him as judge again, but this time with compassion. And he judges with compassion when Yeshua enters behind the drape with the blood of goats and steers to atone. So this is atonement then. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. And then he is El, which expresses his name. It is his title rather than his name that is expressed here. And you will see that it actually reads Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, compassionate and gracious Elohim. But in the original Hebrew, it is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, El. Compassionate and gracious. And his compassionate nature shows out of the fact that compassion is known as Rachum. And this is related to the word which is Rechem, which is a uterus. And this means that he is compassionate as a mother is to a child, as God, and that he is gracious, that he shows grace to everyone. And people who are truly righteous show compassion and grace to people. They are slow to anger. God himself is slow to anger. So this means that they are patient. They abound in love. And one doesn't need to say much about that. But people who are compassionate, who are righteous, abound in love. And they also abound in faithfulness. So their word is their word, as God's word is his word. Whatever he promises, he does. Maintaining love to thousands. Those who love him, he maintains his love for long periods of time and also over many generations. And he forgives wickedness, where wickedness are those sins that are done wittingly. So knowingly people continue to sin. And where this rebellion that is written here is defined as rebellion and sin. And the sins that are committed here means sins that are committed, yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. Yes, for those who ask forgiveness, he forgives wickedness, rebellion, and sin. And those people then become guiltless because they have asked for forgiveness. But he does not leave the guilty unpunished. So those who do not ask for forgiveness, he does not leave unpunished. And he punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and the fourth generation. What happens here is that there are things that run within families where people keep on sinning the same as the sins of their fathers and their mothers. And somewhere in the third or the fourth generation, someone realizes that this is wrong and turns on that sin. Then he can then turn the whole process around for himself and that part of the family that chooses to do so. So, what is compassion? What is righteousness? It is Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, judging without compassion and judging with atonement. El, he's God, he's compassionate, he's gracious, he's slow to anger, he's abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation.
My question is that if Abram was a righteous person, does it mean that he did not get angry in any way? He was just having this, just like God himself, the attributes, the whole attributes of God.
No, that's not what it means. What it means is that Abraham lived in the presence of God, and most of the time he did exactly what he needed to do. But when he sinned, he acknowledged it immediately and he asked forgiveness immediately. Because you can then be forgiven. If you don't ask forgiveness, you can't be forgiven. Okay, because Adam and Eve did not acknowledge their sin.
Each time you go wrong and immediately you ask for forgiveness, then you remain righteous.
Yes, because when you do something wrong, you're unrighteous. When you do sin, you're a sinner. But the minute you ask forgiveness, he says that he forgives the wickedness, rebellion, and sin. If I acknowledge that I have done wrong, people can forgive, and God also forgives. But if you do not acknowledge that you've done wrong, it is a problem. It's a two-way street, because he has the ability to not forgive me. But if he does not forgive me, he also is not forgiven. Yeah, but it must be true, because you see, there are a lot of people who ask, they say, sorry, I did this, but they don't really mean it. That is not righteousness. Righteousness means humbling yourself and acknowledging that you have done wrong. It's not a window dressing thing. It must be real. What actually happens here, it is you who, as you hear from the Spirit, what you're doing is wrong. Then you stop just there and you say, I have done wrong. Please forgive me. And then he actually should say to you, I forgive you. Because forgiveness is expensive. Forgiveness has the price of death. When I forgive someone, I have to die to my right to have retribution. The minute I acknowledge that I have done something wrong, God knows what's in my heart, and he knows whether I'm being true. It does not matter what the other person does. It matters that God has heard that I have asked. I cannot ask God forgiveness if I have sinned against someone else.
Actually looks into our heart. It's true that when you are saying that you've forgiven a person, but deep down, you know that it was only just embracing forgiveness. That's not what God is actually the thing all about. He actually is, he actually punishes those that are wickedness and those actually that rebels, you see, and pretending as if maybe they've forgiven a person.
Now Yudhevave said to Abram, get yourself out of your country, away from your kinsmen and away from your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and I will make your name great, and you are to be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, but I will curse anyone who curses you, and by you all the families of the earth will be blessed. So Avram went, as Yudhevave had said to him, and Lot went with him. Avram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Avram took his wife Sarai, his brother's son Lot, and all their possessions which they had accumulated, as well as the people they had acquired in Haran. Then they set out for the land of Canaan and entered the land of Canaan. So what happened here is a rich man, and Yudhevave spoke. Avram heard the voice, he obeyed as he did, and this was counted to him as righteousness. So it means that his faith was listening to the voice, obeying it. Yudhevave promised to bless Abram and his descendants, to make him a witness to the nations, because he will become a great nation, and the great nations that come out of him will be more than his own physical descent, but also his spiritual descent. And he will bless them through him as his witness.
What is a blessing? Is it a blessing? Is it material blessing? Or is it a spiritual blessing? Because we are in a secular world now. So if you are progressing in life, you've got everything, people regard you as a blessed person. And then if you are not progressing, it's like you are not blessed. So actually, what is a blessing?
Now Adonai said to Avram, get yourself out of your country, away from your kinsmen, away from your father's house, and go to the land I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you are to be a blessing. So this means that the blessing of Abram means that he will become a famous man, and he's very famous. I think you agree. And he is to be a blessing. So he is to bless other people with what he has. And that is with everything he has, with his heart and his soul and with all of his possessions. He is to bless other people as well. And then he says, he will bless those who bless you, and I will curse anyone who curses you. And by you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. The reason that all the families of the earth will be blessed by Abram is because through Abram comes the knowledge that we have to listen to the voice, obey it, and it is counted to us as righteousness. So Avram passed through the land place called Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. The Canaani were then in the land. Yudhevaveh appeared to Abram and said to him, take your descendants, I will give this land. So he built an altar there to Yudhevaveh, who had appeared to him. He left that place, went to the hill east of Bethel, and pitched his tent. With Bethel to the west and Ai to the east, he built an altar there and called on the name of Yudhevaveh. Then Abram traveled on, continuing towards the Negev. So Yudhevaveh, because of this faithfulness and because of Avram's faith, appeared to Abram and made him a promise about the future of the land and about the continued ownership of the land. Then Abram built an altar. And obviously he built this altar to bring sacrifice. And sacrifice means dying to self and sin and one's own works, and being resurrected to righteousness by dying to sin and unrighteousness into the righteousness that God himself creates in us. Now this faith of Avram was then later asked of Israel again, because it says Shema Israel, Yudhevaveh Eloheinu, Yudhevaveh Echad, hear Israel, Yudhevaveh our Elohim, Yudhevaveh is one. And you are to love Yudhevaveh, your Elohim, with all your heart, all your being, and all your resources. These words which I am ordering you today are to be on your heart, and you to teach them carefully to your children. You are to talk about them when you sit at home, when you are traveling on the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. So the confession is to hear the voice. Shema means to hear and to do. So that actually is exactly what Abram did. He heard the voice and did. What did he do? John 14:15 says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And this is clearly what the commandment is, to love him with all your heart, all your being, and all your resources. So that means, this love means keeping the law with all of our heart, with all our being, and all of our resources. And it must be written in the heart. So there's only one way that the commands can be in one's heart, and that is that they are written by Ruach HaKodesh. So it must be in the heart, which is through the Ruach, and one is to teach the children carefully, contextually, with preparedness for the gospel. When you sit up at home and when you are going, when you lie down and when you get up. And one would obviously speak about sitting at home, lying down, getting up, and traveling as these different things become important. And that means that it will be taught contextually, as the Ruach will also teach us. And these children to whom it is to be taught contextually with preparedness for the gospel include those children who are actually not physical children, but new believers, and by manner of speaking, those who come in from the nations. Romans 4:6-9, David says the same thing when he speaks of the blessedness of the one to whom Elohim credits righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sin Yudhevaveh will never count against them. Is this blessedness only for the circumcised, or also for the uncircumcised? We have been saying that Abram's faith was credited him to righteousness. Under what circumstances was it credited? Before he was circumcised, or after he was circumcised, or before? It was not after, but before, as Abram. And he received circumcision as a sign, a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith when he was still uncircumcised. So then, he is the father of all who believe, but have not been circumcised, in order that righteousness might be credited to them. So those who will believe as Abram believed, that they will believe in two ways. First, by hearing the voice, obeying it, and having it credited to righteousness, of hearing God speak, of trusting him that what he promises he will do. And he's also the father of the uncircumcised. So he's also the father of the uncircumcised, because they hear and do, and it's counted to them as righteousness, and because they hear and trust what the Father has said he will do, and in that way they also then become righteous. And he's then also the father of the circumcised, who not only are circumcised, but who also follow in the footsteps of the faith that our father Abram had before he was circumcised. So Abram was justified without circumcision, the father of the faith, and also the father of those who are uncircumcised. But the circumcised are also to have the same faith as Abram or Abraham. For the promise to Abram and to his seed that he would inherit the world did not come through legalism, but through the righteousness that trust produces. For if the heirs are produced by legalism, then trust is pointless and the promise worthless. For what the law brings is punishment, and where there is no law, there is also no violation. The reason the promise is based on trusting is so that it may come as Elohim's free gift, a promise that can be relied on by all the seed, not only those who lie within the framework of the Torah, but also those with the kind of trust Abraham had. Avram Avinu, Avram, our father, for all of us. So this means that this trusting, actually hearing the voice, obeying it, so that it will become righteousness, hearing the voice and trusting that the promises are true, also are counted to righteousness and are the same part of the same coin, just the two faces thereof. For the promise to Abram and his seed that he would inherit the world did not come through legalism. So he inherits the world, the earth. But this world, with the word for earth and the word for Israel is actually the same word. So it is Eretz, which is the land of Israel, but also the earth. And that's this is as a result of the attributed righteousness that comes through the faith of Abraham.
I'd like to comment that, the promises that the Lord gave to Abraham, they didn't materialize like within a short space of time. I mean, if you look into this thing, it looks like the promise was made 20 years before, or more than 25 years before. So, but Abraham was faithful that even though he's very old, he was getting older, but he still believed that the Lord will commit to his promises.
Yeah, I think, again, this teaching right now, it teaches us to exercise patience.
Yes.
And obviously, patience pays. So it means now we have to be like gardeners. We should be in a know that not all seasons are growing seasons. So Abraham's faith teaches us that one has to be patient no matter how long, but victory setting.
This accords with the Tanakh, where it says, I have appointed you to be father to many nations. Abraham is our father in Elohim's sight, because he trusted Elohim as the one who gives life to the dead and calls non-existent things into existence. Now, life to the dead is when he comes and takes away sin and unrighteousness. And then the second facet of faith, which is he calls non-existent things into existence to prove his faithfulness. For he was past hope Abram, yet in hope he trusted that he would indeed become a father to many nations in keeping with what he had been told. So many will your seed be. His trust did not waver when he considered his own body, which was as good as dead, since he was about 100 years old, and when he considered that Sarah's womb was dead too. So he was promised to become the father of many nations, and he trusted Elohim, who gives life to the dead, who resurrects those who are in sin and unrighteousness to sinlessness and righteousness. But also he and Sarah were both dead. So this death that was in them meant that they could not have children at a physical level. But he trusted Elohim that he would get both physical and spiritual descendants. He did not, by lack of trust, side against Elohim's promises. On the contrary, by trust he was given power as he gave glory to Elohim. For he was fully convinced that what Elohim had promised, he could also accomplish. This is why it was credited to his account as righteousness. But the words "it was credited to his account" were not written for him only. They were written also for us, who will certainly have our account credited too, because we have trusted in him who raised Yeshua our Adonai, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, from the dead. Yeshua was delivered to death because of our offenses and raised to life in order to make us righteous. So faith that Elohim is trustworthy is counter to righteousness. To trust in a promise. It's also accounted for faith in resurrection. In the resurrection that comes through Yeshua HaMashiach, because they heard Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh say it. Even faith in Yeshua is because we hear Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh say it. No one can come to faith spontaneously, because believing in Yeshua is not the natural thing to do at all. Genesis 12, verse 10 to 14. But there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down into Egypt to stay there, because the famine in the land was severe. When he came close to Egypt and was about to enter, he said to Sarai, his wife, "Here now, I know that you're a good-looking woman, so when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife,' and kill me but keep you alive. Please say that you're my sister, so that it will go well with me for your sake, and so that I will stay alive because of you." When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians did notice that the woman was very beautiful. So Abram intended to withhold important information. He was lying by omission, but he was righteous. So his righteousness and the way that he lived means that he should have consulted Elohim, and probably did consult Elohim. And the question is whether this was advice that came through the Ruach, through the voice that he heard. So Pharaoh's princes saw her and commended her to Pharaoh. So the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake, giving him sheep, cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female slaves, and camels. But Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh inflicted great plagues on Pharaoh and his household because of Sarai, Avram's wife. Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife?" Pharaoh should have known. He should have checked his facts. The Pharaohs were known for the fact that they often married their sisters. So he, of all, should have known to ask whether she was not only his sister, but also his wife. Pharaoh is supposed to be a ruler, and is supposed to be an intelligent man, because who will travel with a beautiful sister? A sister as beautiful as she was would be married to another man. So all sorts of questions should have arisen. The logical question was whether she was married to him or not. And then Elohim brings the plagues on Pharaoh and not on Abram, because Pharaoh transgressed.
Was he not obliged to give them the information? Okay, he feared for his life. Firstly, I looked at why should he go to Egypt? Why did the Lord permit drought in the area where he lived? So this I took it more on a pragmatic point, on a like that. Even though I am God's child, even though I might be righteous, but I must still be alert for car hijacking. I must be alert for being marked. I must be alert for all that. Even though the Lord is protecting me, but I must still be vigilant on my side.
What you're saying is that bad things can happen to good people. Now, Abram went up from Egypt, he, his wife, and everything he had, and Lot with him into the Negev. And Abram became wealthy with much cattle, silver, and gold. And he went on his travels from the Negev. He came to Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, where he had first built the altar. And there Abram called on the name of Yudhe-Vaveh. And certainly from the faith in that time, he would have sacrificed to Yudhe-Vaveh again. So this means that this altar and sacrificing on it would mean that, again, he died to self and to his sin and was resurrected to new life through the sacrifices he brought. But Abram was very rich, and he continued, he called on Yudhe-Vaveh and then continues with him. Lot, who was also traveling with Abram, also had flocks, herds, and tents, but the land could not support their living together because their possessions were too great for them to remain together. However, quarreling arose between Abram's and Lot's herdsmen. The Kenani and the Perizi were then living in the land. Abram said to Lot, please, let's not have quarreling between me and you, between my herdsmen and yours, since we kinsmen. Isn't the land there in front of you? Please separate yourself from me. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left. So Abram understood this quarreling to be something that was totally ungodly and should not happen. And therefore he asked that there should be separation between Lot and himself. So Lot also was rich, and this conflict between the workers, Abram asked him to separate from him and gave him the first choice in everything. So Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan, was well watered everywhere before Yudhe-Vaveh destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of Yudhe-Vaveh, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Tzoar. So Lot chose all the plain of the Jordan for himself, and Lot traveled eastward. Thus they separated themselves from each other. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, and Lot lived in the cities of the plain, setting up his tent near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were evil, committing great sins against Yudhe-Vaveh. And sitting in the gates along with these people, as we know Lot actually did, he must have known that they were evil. And he also must have known that the principle is that he should not be unequally yoked. So he chooses riches and affluence. He chooses the best. And Lot misses the point. He chooses riches amongst sinners, and does not choose to be amongst those who are godly. So he doesn't do what the logical thing would have been to say to his uncle, that he would work with these people so that the incident would not repeat, but that he should stay with Abram. So they separate, and then Lot is taken captive. When the kings come up against the Sodom and Gomorrah. And then when Abram heard that his nephew had been taken captive, he led out his trained men who had been born in his house, 318 of him, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. So Abram knew that something was wrong. But in spite of the fact that Lot had turned against him a little bit like an enemy by choosing the best, he went to save him. And during the night, he and his servants divided his forces against them, then attacked and pursued them all the way to Hagar, north of Damascus. He recovered all the goods and brought back his nephew Lot with his goods, together with the women and the other people. So here he goes with 318 people, which is just a band by comparison with the armies of all the kings that are mentioned who came up against Sodom and Gomorrah and took Lot away. And then he brought Lot back with his goods. And still Lot did not get the message that Sodom and Gomorrah were evil places and that he would be better off with his uncle. So Abram saves Lot, and he is victorious with a few and brings everything back. And Lot must have experienced Abram's power, but chooses to remain in Sodom amongst the sinful people. After his return from slaughtering Kedar-Laomer and the kings with him, the king of Sodom went to meet him in the Shaveh Valley, also known as the King's Valley. And then Melchizedek, the king of Shalom, brought out bread and wine. He was Kohen of El Elyon, of Elohim Most High, so he blessed him with these words. Blessed be Abram by El Elyon, maker of the heaven and the earth, and blessed be Elyon, who handed your enemies over to you. And Abram gave him a tithe of everything. So the question is, who is this? And according to Paul, this Melchizedek is eternal king without beginning or end. He is the king of righteousness, because that is what Melchizedek means. And that Melchizedek, who is eternal king without beginning or end, and also eternal priest without beginning or end, is Yeshua HaMashiach. And he shares bread and wine with Abram. Now, bread and wine are the usual order in which the bread and the wine are used at the Sabbath. But bread and wine can also be turned around and be wine and bread, and then they're in the order of the Passover. So that by what manner of speaking, Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, was celebrating the Sabbath, but also the Passover with Abram already, even before Yeshua HaMashiach. And this was Yeshua HaMashiach celebrating the Passover with him. Sometime later, the word of Yudevaveh came to Abram in a vision. Don't be afraid, Abram. I am your protector, and your reward will be very great. Abram replied, Yudevaveh Elohim, what good will your gifts be to me if I continue childless, and Eliezer from Damascus inherits my possessions? You haven't given me a child. Abram continued, so someone born in my house will be my heir. But the word of Yudevaveh came to him and said, this man will not be your heir. No, your heir will be a child from your own body. So again, Elohim appears to Abram. Whilst Abram is saying that there is no heir, again, Yudevaveh promises that there will be a physical heir. And then Abram says, Yudevaveh Elohim, how am I to know that I will possess it? So he's asking for a sign. He answered him, bring me a 3-year-old cow, a heifer, a 3-year-old male goat, a 3-year-old ram, and a dove and a young pigeon. And clearly the 3-year-old cow is a representation of the red heifer that died to atone for death. For the 3-year-old female goat, the sin offering for an ordinary person in the nation. The 3-year-old ram, the sin offering for a leader in the nation. But also Yeshua himself, who was to be the sin offering for everyone, and a dove and a young pigeon. He brought him all these, cut the animals in two, and placed the pieces opposite each other, but he didn't cut the birds in half. Birds of prey swooped down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was about to set, a deep sleep fell on Abram. Horror and great darkness came over him. In the days of Abram, the way that the covenant was cut between two people who were making a physical covenant with each other is that they halved their animals, and those making the covenant together moved between the carcasses. And what they actually said to each other is, may what happened to these animals happen to us if we do not keep this covenant that we have made. And after the sun had set, there was a thick darkness, and a smoking firepot and a flaming torch appeared, which passed between these animal parts. So this means that Abram did not move between the portions of the animal, but that it was only Elohim who appeared as a firepot and a flaming torch. And in that way, he made the covenant with Abram, but he is the only guarantor of the covenant. And Abram is not a guarantor to the Elohim makes a covenant with himself. And the smoking firepot is, by way of speaking, a uterus in which new life arises, as in Yeshua. But this is particularly important because this whole promise is about a promise of an heir. So the smoking firepot and the uterus within which it is to arise then actually belong to Elohim himself. And the flaming torch, which is male, also moves between the two halves of the animal. And a pregnancy arises, which actually is what Isaac's spiritual origin is. There is this deed that God makes, and God himself is the only guarantor of the pregnancy that is to come. Abraham does not act as a guarantor in this at all. So his dead body is not to be the guarantor of his success in the pregnancy. And then only Elohim moves between the two halves, and Abraham is an onlooker. The guarantee is Elohim himself, and that is irreversible. That day, Elohim made a covenant with Avram. I have given this land to your descendants, from the valley of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates River, the territory of the Keni, the Kenezi, the Kadmoni, the Hitti, the Perizi, the Rephaim, the Emori, the Canaani, the Girgashi, and the Yevusi. So Yudevave takes the land away from others. He gives it to Abram and to his future descendants. Then Genesis 16, now Sarai, Avram's wife, had not borne him a child, but she had an Egyptian slave girl called Hagar. So Sarai said to Avram, here now, Yudevave has kept me from having go in and sleep with my slave girl. Maybe I'll be able to have children through her. Avram listened to what Sarai said. It was after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan that Sarai, Avram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her slave girl, and gave her to Abram, her husband, to be his wife. Avram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she conceived. But when she became aware that she was pregnant, she looked on her mistress with contempt. Abram fathers a child, a descendant, but Hagar treats Sarah with contempt and is chased away. Then she's in the desert and with a child that clearly is going to die if there isn't some intervention. And the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to her, go back to your mistress and submit to authority. Everywhere else in the scripture where the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh appears, it is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh who speaks. So this is also Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh who speaks. He is the physical appearance of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, because no one has seen the Father but the Son, and who has seen the Son has seen the Father. One must surmise that the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is Yeshua. And he says, go back to your mistress and submit to her authority. The angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to her, I will greatly increase your descendants, and there will be so many that it will be impossible to count them. The angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to her, look, you are pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You are to call him Ishmael. Elohim pays attention, because Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh has paid attention to your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man, with his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, having his life at odds with all his kindred. So the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, or Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh who speaks, is Yeshua. And he says to her, humble yourself and return. And then he promises a great descendancy. And as is known, that is about 1.5 billion people now. Ishmael means that Elohim pays attention, but he's a wild donkey. And in terms of the Torah, a wild donkey that is not redeemed has his neck broken, and therefore, by manner of speaking, is removed as head of the household. When Avram was 99 years old, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh appeared to Avram and said to him, I am El Shaddai, Elohim Almighty. Walk in my presence and be pure-hearted. I will make my covenant between me and you, and I will increase your numbers greatly. Abram fell on his face. Elohim continued speaking with him. As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. Your name will no longer be Avram, exalted father, but your name will be Avraham, father of many, because I have made you the father of many nations. I will cause you to be very fruitful. I will make nations of you. Kings will descend from you. So the promise to Avram at 99, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh appears to him a second time with a promise of many descendants. And his name then changes to Abraham, the father of a multitude of nations. And this is also through Ishmael, through the wild donkey. Genesis 17:7, I am establishing my covenant between me and you, along with your descendants after you, generation after generation, as an everlasting covenant, to be your Elohim for you and for your descendants after you. The promise to Avram too is the promise of a great descendancy. The covenant also applies to the descendants, and this does not exclude Ishmael. Elohim said to Avram, as for you, you are to keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you, generation after generation. Here is my covenant which you are to keep between me and you, along with your descendants after you. Every male among you is to be circumcised. You are to be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin. Here is the sign of the covenant between me and you. Generation after generation, every male among you who is 8 days old is to be circumcised, including slaves born within your household and those bought from a foreigner, not descended from you. The slave born in your house and the person bought with your money must be circumcised. Thus my covenant will be in your flesh as an everlasting covenant. The covenant is to be handed down to the children on the 8th day. A week has 7 days, and the 8th day only exists in the eternal dimension, in eternity, and it prepares the boy for eternity, and therefore for the eternal covenant. that God is making with him. The foreskin is removed. Yeshua is our circumcision. He is cut away from man as sin. So the foreskin is also cut away as sin. And he is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh's circumcision for Abram's descent, the circumcision that brings people into the eternity. Avram took Ishmael, his son, all the slaves born in his house and all who had been bought with his money, every male among the people in Avram's household, and circumcised the flesh of the foreskin that very day, just as Elohim had said to him. Avram was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, and Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. Abram and Ishmael, his son, were circumcised on the same day, and all the men in his household, both slaves born in his house and those bought with money from a foreigner, were circumcised with him. Abram includes Ishmael in the covenant. He was 13 years old. 13 is the number of love, because 6 is the number of man, and 7 is the cardinal number of Elohim. So 6 plus 7 makes 13, and that is the number of love, expressing Elohim's love also for Ishmael.
Ishmael was circumcised.
Yeah.
And Islam today recognizes Abraham as their father. So I was wondering, in a very, very practical sense, do they practice circumcision? Because it was given to their Ishmael forefather as well to be circumcised.
Yes, they're uniformly circumcised. Yes, but the thing is that they circumcise, and they're supposed to be part of Abraham's household, but they have changed the scriptures by saying that it was Ishmael who was sacrificed and not Isaac. So by just doing that, they're off the track completely, and they miss the issue of who is the real ram that is to be circumcised. And obviously that happens to Israel as a nation as well. So there's a triple descendancy for Isaac, for Abram, and they're actually the Jews, the Christians, and the Islamites. And obviously at this stage, the Islamites are following Satan. The Jews are not following the God of Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, even though they think so. And because of issues that we've already discussed and the deep division between the different parts of the church also is not worshipping the God of Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, because if they were, they would be in unity with each other. Because what happened in Galatians is there are people that said to the Galatians that you need to be circumcised and to keep the whole Torah. And Paul said those people should actually maim themselves and cut it all off instead of trying to circumcise people, because they're taking the people away from the essence of the faith. Because what they were doing, they were trying to make Jews of the people, and what the gospel was that Shaul was preaching is he was preaching that you should all be coming to righteousness. Now, if you depend on your circumcision to be your righteousness and on the law, then you're living in legalism. And when you're living in legalism, you're actually drawing a line through the cross and you're making nothing of it. So these things all sort of come into one place to say that for believers out of the nations, it is not necessary to have themselves circumcised. Actually, it is not desirable to have yourselves circumcised. And then there's a whole discussion that goes on, and it ends up saying there may be no idolatry. And at that stage, when new people came to faith, idolatry was determined by the Jews who believed, because they knew what idolatry is. And idolatry was defined in Deuteronomy as anything that the nations worship their gods with, you are not to do in worship of your God, because that is idolatry. The second thing is, he said there's to be no sexual immorality. And sexual immorality means cheating on your wife. It also means cheating on God. And so it's actually idolatry again. But the third thing is the opposite of sexual immorality, is being absolutely reliable in everything you do and say. So you must be absolutely reliable, never tell a lie, never make any skew remarks, never participate in anything where you can create a misunderstanding in any way, shape, or form. And the third thing they said, the third thing is actually don't eat strangled animals. We'll return to that. And then they say do not participate of blood. And to participate of blood in the Jewish context is to commit murder. So the opposite of murder is love. So he was saying, learn what it is to really love the Lord your God. Don't participate in idolatry. Be absolutely reliable to God, to your wife, and to everybody. And learn to love all people. And those three things are the center of this all. And to that, he added, and do not eat what is strangled, because a strangled animal is not a kosher animal, and Jews are not allowed to eat that. So it actually is saying, go and eat what is kosher, because if you eat what is kosher, you will have admission to Jewish homes, and then you can learn from them what it is to live righteously. And then it says, for Moses is preached in all the synagogue, has been preached in all the synagogues since the beginning, which actually means the rest of the Torah you can go and learn in the synagogue. And this actually says that there are things that have to be done first, and these first things that you have to do are the milk of faith. The history continues, and in Genesis 18, verses 17 to 20, Yudevave says, should I hide from Abram what I'm about to do, inasmuch as Abram is sure to become a great and strong nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed by him. For I have made myself known to him, so that he will give orders to his children and to his household after him, to keep the way of Yudevave and to do what is right and just, so that Yudevave may bring about for Abram what he has promised him. Yudevave said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so serious. Avram, in terms of what is said here, could teach his descendants how to live righteously. In other words, how to hear the voice, obey it, and have it counted to them as righteousness. And Yudevave speaks to Avram about Sodom and Gomorrah. Then the men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Abram remained standing before Yudevave. Then Abram approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of 50 righteous people in it? Now, Abram knew full well at this stage that there was only one righteous man in the city, and that was Lot. But he was starting to plead for Lot. Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all earth do right? Yudevave said, I will find 50. If I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. So if there's a righteous community within Sodom, then they will be spared, because a righteous community will have the ability that Avram has, and that is to teach all the people in the city the truth and to bring them into a relationship with Yudevave. And he continued negotiating for 45, 40, 30, 20. Then he said, may Yudevave not be angry, but let me speak just one more. What if only 10 can be found? He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. Then when Yudevave had finished speaking with Avram, he left, and Avram returned home. So Avram stopped speaking when the issue became 10 men. He was actually pleading for the righteous Lot. And he was pleading that the city be saved for a minyan, which is a congregation ruled by 10 righteous men, because 10 is the rulership of a congregation. So 10 righteous men can lead a righteous community and teach the community righteousness, but it doesn't exist in the cities. And for that reason, Abram stops arguing. Abram knows that he has laid the groundwork for Lot to be saved, which then happened with the destruction of the cities with their unrighteous communities. In Genesis 22, verses 1 to 3, sometime later, Abram tested Abram. He said to him, Abram, here I am. He replied. Then Elohim said, take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you. Early the next morning, Abram got up, loaded his donkey, took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place Elohim had told him about. Abram took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. And the 2 of them went together. Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abram, Father, yes, my son. Abram answered, the fire and wood are here. Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abram answered him, Elohim himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them went on together. Judah asked Abram to sacrifice his son. Abram heard the voice and he obeyed. Abram took everything for the sacrifice, so the fire and the knife and the wood. And Isaac asked, where is the lamb? And Abram said, Elohim will provide. And the original Hebrew can be read to understand, and will provide himself the ram, which eventually did in Yeshua. When they reached the place Elohim had told him about, Abram built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay him. But the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh came to him from heaven. Abram, here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy. He said, do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear Elohim, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So the voice of heaven, which clearly was Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh himself, came and spoke to Abram and said that he was not to hurt the boy. And then Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh did what Abram had said that he would do. Now, Abram clearly believed one of a couple of things. Abram was completely happy to give his son. But then if his son was slain, he also believed that his son would be resurrected from the dead. So in Avram's belief about what would happen on the altar, he actually already believed in the death and the resurrection of the Messiah. The angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, who is Yeshua, says, you have not withheld your son from me. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh also did not withhold his son, his only son, Yeshua. And the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, provides the ram, and later the real ram,